rarely hear about.
Well, welcome all. Welcome all. We have an exciting event planned for you tonight. My name is Gil Guido, and I'm the newest member of the defeatHIV Community Advisory Board here in Seattle. And part of our mission is to bring the community together to help researchers bring forth a cure in HIV. This session is part of our mission. This session is here to bring you some results as part of a focus group that was done last year. And our guest speaker is Lori Sila, and she will be our guest speaker. And as far as Lori she's a dear friend of mine. She has been involved in AIDS since the early days of the epidemic. She's been an outspoken advocate, a program manager, agency director, educator, trainer, coalition leader, consultant, and researcher working domestically and internationally. She helped co-fund several AIDS organizations, including the AIDS Council of the Northeastern New York, the Community Research Initiative of New England, Microbicides Now, and the Living Center. She currently serves on the defeatHIV Community Advisory Board here in Seattle and is a delegate to the Martin Delaney Towards an HIV Cure Collaboratory, which is made up of representatives from all the NIH-funded cured collaboratories. So without further ado, please help me welcome Lori Sila.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for coming out tonight. You had a lot of things I'm sure you could have done this evening, so hopefully you'll find this worthwhile. When we did the focus groups that we held last spring, one of our commitments is to share the information back with people who participated in the focus groups. Because often people get asked to participate in research, but then you never get to see what's published in the peer-reviewed journals. So we wanted you to be able to hear back on what it was we found when we did these focus groups. So the focus groups are part of a larger project looking at the willingness of people with HIV to participate in HIV cure research studies. And what we wanted to do is get some more in-depth feedback from people on what it is, how people felt about an HIV cure, what would draw you to participate or not participate in a trial, what are things you'd want researchers to know. So what we're doing is sharing the results just of the groups that we did here in Seattle. Yes. So I really want to start by thanking the people who participated in those focus groups. If you were a focus group participant, we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your feelings and your views on things. And we also appreciate the people that really helped make those happen. There were a number of people from the defeatHIV Community Advisory Board who helped with recruitment, who helped with staffing the focus groups. So if Trinisha, Manuel, Bill, and Michael would stand for a minute, I'd like to acknowledge them for their work. So there were 10 focus groups held throughout the U.S. 4 of them were here in Seattle. The other cities were Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Durham, North Carolina. In Seattle, we had the groups separated demographically. We did one for women, we did one for long-term survivors, and we defined that as living with HIV for 20 or more years. That was actually our largest focus group. We did one for young adults on people who were under the age of 30. So these were people whose lives we knew were not affected and didn't see the horrible ways everybody was dying back in the 80s. And then we did one, it was supposed to be for men of color. We did it at Entre Hermanos, so we wound up with an all Hispanic group of gay men in that focus group. So this is not representative of the views of all people with HIV or all kinds of groups of people with HIV. We had actually attempted to recruit a group of HIV positive women who were transgender, but because of stigma and other things, we weren't able to make that group happen. We are planning to do future, perhaps in-depth interviews, one-on-one, to make it safer for people to participate. So again, we know this isn't representative of everybody, but we're going to share the results of what it was we learned. And I'd really like to encourage this to be interactive. So, you know, perhaps you were a focus group participant and you have something you want to add to anything, please feel free. And if you have any questions or any other thoughts, feel free to pop those out during the presentation. So this is, yep.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Why 3 on the West Coast and 1 on the East Coast? Was there a reason for that?
Because the collaborators lived in those cities, really. So that was the main thing. The person who is the principal investigator, she was based in North Carolina, and the other HIV, and so there was a collaboratory base there, and this is where the other originally funded Cure collaboratories were based. So NIH, the National Institute of Health, is funding these different groups that are based out of major research institutions to do the biomedical research. And then all of those groups have community advisory boards. And we felt like it was important to get the input of people with HIV into the biomedical research that's going on that will eventually have clinical trials associated with them. So basically, I just told you all this. This is what the focus groups focused on. And our demographics were kind of interesting. So we had 31 people participate from Seattle, and the nature of the kinds of groups we had means that we had a lot of older people and some younger people. To me, it's pretty amazing. We had 3 people in their 70s and 5 in their 60s. That's pretty unusual to find in a typical research sample. There were 7 people under the age of 30. We only had 1 person in their 30s. So when you think about the demographics of HIV, this is kind of an unusual grouping. About slightly more than half were white, and about 1/3 were women, and about half identified as gay, and then of course we had all kinds of gender and gender identity. What's the word I want? Different people had different kinds of orientations and gender expressions that they indicated, and we had very few people who had been injection drug users, which in Seattle is not surprising, because the epidemiology of HIV in Seattle is very much driven by men having sex with men more so than by substance abuse, the way it is in the Northeast. One of the things that was interesting was we had asked people if they had previously participated in any HIV cure trials, and some people weren't sure, and some people said they had, but then when you actually asked them about the trial, it was really a treatment trial. And the concern that raises is that feels to me like maybe we're not doing a good enough job of making sure that when people are participating in research, that they really understand what it is they're agreeing to participate in and what the purpose is. And we have to make sure we really do a good job of informed consent, which means not just having papers in legalese that protect the institution, but papers and people speaking with potential participants to make sure people really understand what it is that they're doing. So I think that that was an important kind of side finding that we had. So when we asked people, what would an HIV cure mean to you? The majority of responses we got were very positive. They were talking about freedom and freedom from stigma, freedom from medication. People thought if they were able to no longer be HIV positive from the cure, that that would help reduce their own stigma, as well as at a community level that would combat stigma. Happiness and hope and all kinds of positive things. But some people also found it scary. This is something new, it's unknown. What do we know about what it's going to be like? And when the trials are going on, before we know if something is going to work or not, well, are people actually perhaps even risking their lives in the quest for a cure? So there was both a lot of hope and a lot of desire mixed in with some weariness. So again, people felt like it would be so nice to have this eradicated. We've eradicated other things. Wouldn't it be great if we could eradicate HIV? And I think for people who, started on treatment years ago, when it wasn't a pill a day, and who've taken all kinds of things that have left them with all kinds of side effects and toxicities. Some people are really experiencing medication fatigue and would really welcome a cure, would welcome not having to take these meds all the time.
Question.
Yeah.
I just have a question on the cure. They're working towards getting a cure. But my question, and I have yet to ask any research people on this, is when it does come around, is it going to completely cure us of the virus, or is it going to be like hepatitis C, and we're still going to have it in our system, but it's not going to be affecting us?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to ask if you wouldn't be waiting a minute or two, because I'm going to get to that in the slides.
Okay.
So what it is we're actually talking about when we talk about cure. But again, there's a sense of, well, could we trust it? If we find something and we're told we're cured, how do we know it's going to last? Is it a cure for 5 years? Is it a cure for 50 years? What do we really know about this? And can we be sure that we've gotten every last bit of, replication competent DNA of the virus out of the body and it won't come back one day? So some people feel like it would have to be around for a while before I could really trust this. So that was definitely a concern among quite a number of people. For some people who've been living with HIV for so long, it's become a core piece of their identity. And people are wondering, what would it really be like to not have this anymore? Who would I be in the world if I gave up my identity of living with HIV? So as much as people might want a cure, having to wrestle with that was something that did come up for a few people. And then skepticism. How do we know it's going to work? How well will it work? How long will it work? How will we know if it's working? How will we know if it stops working? And what would that mean if it no longer does? So, are you more vulnerable if you experience this? So people had a number of questions about it. And what will the process be? People generally had no idea what kinds of things people are looking at in terms of a cure and what the procedures would be. So some people were imagining they'd be cut open, that there'd be some kind of a surgery. Some people thought there'd be a lot of needles and things. So I think that we really need to do a better job of educating people about, well, what are the things the scientists are looking at that are close to trials or even that are in trials, and what will those kinds of procedures be? What will we be asking people to do if they want to participate in research that would help lead towards a cure. So when we're imagining things, sometimes what we're imagining is, maybe worse than what it's going to be, or maybe it's not as bad as what it's going to be. So having information than we do is going to be important. Some people worried, well, all right, so if we can cure this, do we lose our disability? Do I lose my Medicaid? Do I lose my benefits? What if I'm not well enough to go back to work? What will the government expect of me? So concern that there could be financial ramifications to being cured was a concern that people have. So getting back to the question, what do we mean by a cure? When researchers talk about a cure, they talk about two different kinds of cures. They typically talk about a sterilizing cure, and I'm actually on a mission to get them to stop using the word sterilizing, because people don't like the word sterilizing. At least that's what you told us. So another way to think about that is eradicating. So when most people think of a cure, they think about HIV being completely gone from their bodies. They're no longer HIV positive. Some people talk about also being resistant to becoming infected with if you encounter HIV again. A very important point for people was to not be able to transmit HIV to any of their partners. So people generally think about a cure the way we think about, smallpox being cured. It's not here anymore. So there's a population level element of a cure as well, right? That nobody has HIV anymore. That would be eradicating at a population level. Typically when we're talking about eradicating rather than sterilizing, we're talking about eradicating in the body, not at the population level, because that's Now, when scientists are talking about a cure, a number of them talk about a functional cure. So a functional cure would mean that HIV is no longer doing damage in your body. All the problems with inflammation people may have heard about, that's not happening anymore. It's not causing disease. It's not progressing. It's not replicating. You can't transmit it to anybody, but it's still there. You just don't have to take your meds to suppress it. And so the belief held by many is that it will be easier to attain a functional cure than what we would think of as a classic cure, where HIV is actually completely gone. So what they're really talking about is durable viral suppression, or managing HIV persistence. So there are people that feel like we should use that kind of language when we're talking about what has been classically referred to as a functional cure, because most people don't think about it as a cure if it's still there. So even though that might be easier to achieve, is that really cure? And the concern is also that in order to be part of cure research, some people might be willing to take risks that they might not take just to manage persistence. It doesn't have the same emotional pull. And some people feel like that's a more honest representation of what the work actually is. We're actually working on both kinds of cure are being researched. What people talk about as a functional cure, and what has been referred to as a sterilizing or an eradicating cure. So people are working on both of those things, and often the functional cures people equate with like cancer remission, where it goes away, but it could come back. And in cancer, we actually have a standard. They know that if cancer is gone for 5 years, the odds of it returning are very, very low, which is why they consider you cured after 5 years. We have no kind of similar benchmark where we would be able to say something similar for HIV if it wasn't doing anything for a certain period of time. So again, most people, when we ask them, well, what a cure would be, most people are really thinking of total eradication, of HIV being gone. And pretty much almost everybody in the focus groups said that they would prefer a sterilizing or an eradicating cure to a functional cure. And a lot of people actually had trouble understanding even what a functional cure would be. It seemed like an odd concept to people. I'm not reading you everybody's words because you have them.
Lori, I had a question.
Yeah.
What didn't people like about sterilizing?
The word? Well, there's a number of reasons people don't like the word sterilize, right? I mean, when you just think about a sterile room, it's kind of like cold, right, and bare. But the other thing is when we think about who many of the people are who are affected by HIV, like women of color and poor people, some people remember the histories of forced sterilization of women of color and of poor women, and so when they hear the word sterilize, there's a connotation, there's a memory of bad things being done to people in the course of clinical care. Somebody would go in to have a baby and they'd wake up and find out their tubes had been tied and they'd never given permission for that. So for some people the word evokes that, and for some people it's just kind of like that cold kind of a thing. So people didn't like that word, and so we're encouraging researchers to shift their language from sterilize to eradicate. Now, public health people think about eradication at a population level, so sometimes they're not comfortable with using the word eradicate when you're talking about a cure within an individual rather than within a population. So, and they want to use the word eliminating cure. So, we'll be debating this for a while. So, but I think for most people, this was the general sense they had about a functional cure, that it felt like a time bomb. That, if I'm taking my medicine every day and that's keeping me undetectable, then I know I'm not getting sick, I know I'm not transmitting to other people, and I am in control of that as long as I take my medicine every day. And a large number of people preferred that sense of control to the idea of something that, okay, it's going to keep it suppressed, but I don't know how long, I don't know if it's coming back, I don't know when it's coming back, how will I know? Might I inadvertently transmit to somebody else because I didn't know it was back? What kind of monitoring will I need, of my viral load? How often will I have to be checking that in order to feel secure? So there was an insecurity that people had around being able to trust a functional cure, that it really felt like a time bomb to many people. And so again, some people are pretty freaked out by the concept. People also felt like a functional cure wouldn't end stigma because you would still be living with HIV. And some people felt like it wasn't acceptable. Now there were other people who did feel like, I've got medication fatigue going on, I would really love to not take my meds, and if they could find a functional cure, that would be better than what I've got going on right now. But again, there's another thing is, how would I feel if I thought I was functionally cured and then it came back, right? What is the emotional devastation associated with believing you're cured and then finding out you're not cured? Especially if it came back and it came back worse, or one of the medication that worked for you doesn't work anymore. So those are the kinds of things people were afraid of. And some people felt like, I worked really hard to get where I am. I've been sick, and I'm not sick right now. I don't want to mess with this if it's working. So maybe trying to get cured isn't worth it. Yeah, you have nothing.
Now with the cure, eventually you guys are going to hopefully have one. With a cure, are they going to have to wean us off our medication so that if something does happen and it comes back, that there's gonna be less risk of resistance to that medication? Or are they just gonna give us a cure and take us off meds?
Well, I don't know. So, I mean, what's gonna happen in trials, so I can talk about what's gonna happen in trials before I know what will happen with whatever's approved, because it will depend on the nature of whatever it is they wind up having. But in trials, if they have enough evidence that something looks like it might be doing what they hope it will do, at some point they will need to do a treatment interruption where you go off your antiretroviral meds. So when you start whatever it is you're going to be given, you'll still be on your medication. And then at some point when they think it's safe or relatively safe, they will take you off of your medication for a period of time, and they will monitor your viral load closely during that time to make sure it's not coming back. And certainly at the first sign that there is viral activity going on, they would put you either back on the meds you were on or different meds, but you would restart your medication definitely if there was any sign of that. Now in the trials, there may also be a particular duration, like, well, okay, we're going to keep everybody off for 6 months or for 3 months or for 2 years, or whatever that is. And if people don't have a bad effect, then they will continue to keep you off the meds for that period, and then they may have you go back on your meds if the study is only designed for you to be off your meds for a certain period of time. So so they're going to have to pay very close attention to what's going on with people, because everybody agrees that the safety of the people who are participating in the trial is of paramount importance. And so for trials to be ethical, we need to make sure that people's health is being tended to.
Okay.
Some people actually feel like, you know what, on my meds, I'm undetectable, I'm not able to transmit to anybody, I'm feeling good. They feel like that is the equivalent of a functional cure. Even though the way scientists are looking at functional cure, it's having all of those things in the absence of treatment. Now, I don't know how many people know this, but one of the things being researched, not as a cure, but as treatment, are longer acting ARVs, that maybe you would get an injection once a month or something like that, rather than having to take pills every day. And some people consider that to be like a functional cure. But again, that's not how the researchers are looking at it, but it is how a number of participants looked at functional cure. Some people were pretty optimistic and felt like, all right, well, we've cured Hep C, why not HIV? We've cured other things, and when you look at where we've come between, say, the early 1980s, when we had absolutely nothing to offer anybody who had AIDS, to where we are today, a pill a day, it's like pretty amazing for those of us who lived through all the decades of the epidemic. So why not be able to cure HIV? And then some other people feel like, not in my lifetime, this isn't happening, no way. So we had both optimism and pessimism around people's belief that a cure would actually happen anytime in the next couple of decades. So we asked people also, what would make you want to participate in HIV cure trials? And certainly a big thing that came up was giving back, being part of finding a cure, the value people placed on cure, and being able to contribute to that was a very big motivator for people to want to participate in HIV cure trials. Some people wanted to participate because of potential personal benefit. Some people said, well, if this is something that might cure HIV, maybe I could be cured. It's going to be very important in the early clinical trials for us to make clear how little we know about the likelihood of something we're giving people actually curing them. There's something called curative misconception. Very important. Transportation came up over and over and over again as something that was really important to people. So whether you're giving people bus passes or paying for their parking, those kinds of things. Women in particular were interested in childcare and flexibility. People want to know, well, like, how hard is it going to be for me to participate in this? You know, I don't want to be jumping through a lot of hoops. I don't want it taking over my whole entire life. So making it easy for people to participate. A number of people also spoke about wanting incentives, wanting to be paid for their time, you know, or you know, give me a chance to win groceries. People really feel like, you know, money motivates people, and I'm putting myself and my body on the line. I'm giving you my time. I want to be paid. IRBs, which are institutional review boards, those are bodies that approve studies. Some IRBs feel that compensating people winds up being what they call undue inducement in research, which means because I'm paying you, you're going to be willing to take a risk that you otherwise wouldn't take. And so they don't want to pay people. Other bodies feel like, well, people do deserve to be compensated for what it is we're asking them to do. So we're certainly interested in communicating to the Fred Hutch IRB that folks with HIV want to be compensated for participating in these kinds of trials. And there are some people who are interested, doing, separate from this, doing some other research looking at, is there a way to set some standards around valuation of compensation so that it's fair and people aren't, you know, being undervalued, but also that you're not influencing people in a way that would make them take other risks. And that depends a lot on who would the study participants be, where is the study taking place, right? If you're doing a study in Africa in a place where people don't have access to regular health care, maybe free access to health care is an undue inducement. You know, or maybe free access to health care, if you make it available to the broader community where you're doing the research, isn't an undue inducement. So there are ways of, you know, working with things. What would you do for $20? What would you do for $300? Well, you know, if I have a house, you know, and enough food to eat, you know, I might not be willing to do a whole lot for $20 besides take a survey. But if I'm not going to eat, you know, maybe that would make me take more risks. So it's kind of complicated how to figure out the right amount of compensation and the right way to compensate people, but it was very, very clear that people wanted compensation for their participation. So, yeah. Inconvenience would definitely discourage people from participating. They also wanted to be able to, you know, drop out of the study, and pretty much in all ethical research, you can change your mind at any point in the study. You can say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Now, of course, study staff might try and work with you and find out why it is you don't want to do this anymore, and see if there's a way to make it work for you, right? Because we want to retain people in studies as much as we can. But studies are voluntary, so people can choose to opt out of them. Somebody said they wouldn't be in the study if they wouldn't be able to have sex during the study. You know, if I have to show up too many times. So those kinds of things had an impact on people's willingness to participate. And then things people are afraid of, right? There's, what if somebody finds out I'm doing this, and then there's stigma. What if I get sicker? Which is a very real risk that could happen to people. Being undetectable and fearing that, if I do this, what happens if the virus comes back? Not knowing what kind of side effects there might be, because some of the things being looked at are products that have been used in fighting cancer, and they have some known side effects and toxicities. Some of the things that we're looking at are brand new technologies, and we actually may not know a whole lot beyond what we're able to learn from the preclinical studies that are done in the lab and that are done on animals before they're done on people. So there may just be limited information, and some people could get sicker. And for women of reproductive age, the impact on the reproductive system was another concern that women in particular voiced. One person said, what if there are side effects, like if I go blind in one eye or it kills me, right? So what's gonna happen? What happens to my family if that happens? Some people felt like there should be some kind of life insurance for people who are participating in the trials, or some kind of compensation to their survivors if somebody dies in a trial. And people have died in phase 1 trials of different kinds of things for different kinds of illnesses. Some people were worried about, would HIV mutate then? Might I wind up with a mutant strain? Or could things be worse? And so people are, again, there was a lot of fear about messing with their health when their health was actually pretty good. The flip side of that are people who are worried that they won't be able to be included. So people have been excluded because their T cells are too high, or their T cells are too low, or they're women of reproductive age who've been left out of many, many, many trials. If you've been on this medication, will you be excluded? If you wind up in one kind of a cure trial, will you not be able to be in a different kind of cure trial later when they come up with the next best thing? So people who've been excluded from treatment trials have a lot of concerns about being excluded from cure trials. And so how do we set things up so that we can be as inclusive as possible, so we can get a broad group of people with HIV participating in these trials, and yet still be able to answer the questions we need to answer about the products. So when you start research, typically you go through the preclinical part where they're testing in the lab in the test tube, and then they move to animals, and then they move to very small studies in people who are as healthy as possible, typically, so that you have your best shot at seeing an effect, if there's going to be one. And then you move, and those are just safety studies as well. So you only want to give it to a few people to make sure it's safe, and then you do expanded safety studies, and then you get bigger and you do broader trials, and you look for evidence of this working. So how the eligibility criteria will be set will have a lot to do with wanting to keep people safe, wanting to see if there's an effect, and then gradually including more and more people. We also asked people about their expectations of researchers. If you were going to participate in a trial, what do you want from the people who are actually running the trial? And those expectations fell into 4 different broad categories. So one had to do with the expertise and the knowledge of the researchers, right? How do I know you're a credible person, that if I volunteer in your study, you're going to be able to answer the study question, I can count on you, I can trust you to do things right. Other expectations were around information and procedures. I want you to tell me everything I need to know. Others expectations are more relational. how are you gonna treat me? How do you see me as a person? How do you relate to me? How do you look at me? How do you understand my culture? So, questions people have, right? Who's doing the research? And what are your motives? Why are you doing this, right? Do you just want the grant money? Or do you really care about me and finding a cure for my disease? People wanted competence. People wanted researchers that they would feel comfortable with. They wanted people who were professional. This was one area, we didn't do an actual comparison of themes that came up in the different groups, but in the group of Latino gay men is where the whole issue of professionalism and competence and reputation came out the most. It was discussed much more than it was in the other groups, so I thought that was kind of interesting. And they wanted people to understand the community and the people that they were going to be researching and working with. They want to be updated on progress. They wanted people who spoke their language. So if I'm Hispanic, I don't want an interpreter to have to tell me, you know, what the informed consent is. I want you to explain to me and to be able to explain to me in my language what's going on. They want to be talked to in terms they understand. So not using all kinds of big scientific words, if we can make things simpler and more understandable for people. And they want the researchers to explain to them, what is it you're going to learn from this study? What am I participating in? And what is that going to do? Being able to trust the researchers, right? That they're on your side, that they care about you, that they'll take good care of you, that you're going to be available to them, was a really important thing for people. People want to feel respected. They want their time to be respected. And if something bad does happen, they want to feel like there's some comfort available to them from the study team. People also wanted to be seen as people, right? I think any one of us in this room, if we were going to volunteer for something, we'd want to be seen as a person, not just as, okay, here's a subject that's getting me to my end. So that was important for folks. They wanted people to understand that people are already stigmatized, and many people feel like they've already been traumatized. For many people, they felt like, you know, their HIV diagnosis was a trauma, just in and of itself, regardless of whatever other trauma they had had in their lives. And so they wanted researchers to be trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive. They also wanted people available after hours. And if I have a side effect at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm scared, is there somebody that I can call about that? And people didn't want to feel like guinea pigs. So in particular, around that 24-hour availability, right? If the study's 24/7, you better be sure that if you're having a reaction, somebody better be on that phone to listen to me. You know, if I'm calling at 4 in the morning, you know, I know they have lives too, but if people are giving them their bodies and their time and all that, they can do it for a little while too, was how potential participants felt about that. Again, people wanted the researchers to be culturally and linguistically able to understand people, and to really honor the reciprocity of the relationship, right? The researchers need the participants as much as the participants need the researchers to do what they're doing, and to be treated and valued as an equal partner in the research. So people want to feel appreciated for what they're doing. I kind of liked this one, pretend to remember me convincingly. So again, this is more of the same, but having all these quotes just showing you kind of the consistency that people really felt about people not making assumptions about them, being taken seriously, being respected. And people aren't just one thing, right? So we can be scared and brave at the same time. And it is scary to participate in a trial of something brand new that's, people have never experienced in their bodies before. And it takes bravery to step up and do that. And so for the researchers to understand that folks are both scared and brave. Mental health was another area that we explored. We asked people what they wanted researchers to know about mental health and their potential participation. So somebody brought up the concern, well, is it possible that whatever the cure is, could that interact with psychotropic medication? Right? People might be on antidepressants and anti-anxiety agents, and you need to worry about any interactions with that. Would having a history of substance use or mental illness, would that exclude people from trials? So again, people being worried about being left out. And it's important for the researchers to be aware there could be underlying depression or anxiety, and to pay attention to, is that worsening as a result of trial participation or not? And that these kinds of changes people are going through in and of themselves can be pretty stressful. Also to be aware that if people start exhibiting symptoms of depression or anxiety or any other kind of mental health issue, that could actually be a response to the intervention. And so to monitor for that is a potential side effect. And treating mental health as if, as important as you treat a cardio issue. That it has the same kind of magnitude of importance. So, one participant said that when they were diagnosed, I had the deepest, darkest time of my life, and I'd hate for them to use that against me because it was caused by my diagnosis. So not being excluded from the opportunity to participate in a study because you were depressed when you got your diagnosis. Somebody raised an interesting question. How many of them have been researched? Not just doing it for others, but how many of them have been doing it, have been in research, right? So that's a search for empathy. How well can the researchers really understand what it's like to walk in my shoes? And people had some, pretty good suggestions around dealing with some of the mental health issues that might come up. Doing things like baseline and periodic screening for mental health issues throughout the study. Being aware of possible intervention side effects. Having mental health consultants or mental health staff actually be on the research team or working with researchers. And having people be having a mental health evaluation from a mental health professional as part of their participation. One person said we should have support groups for people in the study to fetch to each other. And for those of you who are not Jewish or from the Northeast, fetch is a Yiddish word for complain. But, again, and often we say, oh, well, there's confidentiality. But if you had a voluntary group that people from the study chose to go to and they were willing to disclose their study participation to those other people, there could be value in that for people, because then they know somebody else who's going through the same thing. Being able to have someone to talk to, again, making sure that the researchers were knowledgeable about things like, psychoactive medications and things like that. Having appropriate referrals available so that if somebody needs more mental health support during the course of the study, then the researchers are in a position to provide, be able to refer to somebody for mental health services. And again, being aware of stigmatizing language was something that people brought up. Another concern people had was, well, when we find this, who's gonna get it, right? I mean, you know, even now, today, half of the people in the world with HIV don't have access to ARVs. Right? We're very fortunate. We live somewhere where most people who need access to ARVs can get it. And that's not true everywhere in the world. So once we have a cure, who's going to get it? And how is it going to be paid for? What is it going to cost? I know a lot of people felt pretty outraged at the price of the hepatitis C cure, right? And charging 80 grand for treatment, yeah, kind of puts it out of reach for lots of people. So what are they going to charge when we have something that actually appears to cure HIV in a reasonable way? And so people want to make sure that it's not just for the wealthy.
If people bring up the issue on the cure when it does come through, if insurance is going to cover it?
We didn't get into specifics about insurance coverage, but I think what people were concerned about, you know, how would it be made available to people, right? So certainly in the US, insurance coverage would be one way, right? And then, you know, would Medicaid cover it, would Medicare cover it, you know, would people of this income have access? You know, all of those things. And then you have other places in the world, you know, where people don't even have anything like that. So, you know, how do we make this available
For them as well.
Yeah, for everyone. There's a lot of talk about scalability and what might be scalable and what's not scalable. And what may not be scalable today could be scalable, you know, a decade from now for all we know. Because technology changes and pricing of things change. You know, it used to cost, I think, $1 million to sequence DNA, and now it costs like 100. You know, so we have researchers at the Hutch doing work on how do you do gene therapy in a box. So there's all kinds of ways we can look at making whatever gets discovered scalable, and that will depend on community activism, political will, you know, those kinds of things that will make a difference to making sure that everybody who wants it get it. And you know, again, these are more quotes about people wanting it accessible to everybody in the world, getting it to the people who need it most. How are they going to decide who gets this and who doesn't get this? So a commitment to equity is important to people. So I want to also acknowledge some people. I've acknowledged the people from the CAB who helped make this happen, the organizations that helped us, Madison Clinic, HAO, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and MJ Hermanos served as sites for the focus groups. There were people who worked on the focus groups in other towns, and again, most importantly, to the focus group participants themselves who really made this happen, who made this possible, who were willing to share their thoughts and their feelings with us. So we really appreciate all of you. And now, if there are other questions people have, I'm happy to. Just apologize for how many words are on these slides. I don't usually make such wordy slides, but since it was reporting back on what people said, I wanted you to have the words that they said.